All right. Good afternoon, folks, and thank you for coming out to the webinar today that is being hosted by the Illinois Higher Education Center. My name is Annabelle Escamilla, and I am the Assistant Director for IHEC. And we are pleased today to be hosting Dr. Michael Mackert with us today on his presentation on social connection and coping strategies for substance use disorder. So as per usual, we will ask that you mute yourselves and there will be time for a chat, and questions at the end. And if you need anything throughout the presentation, please feel free to message me as well. After the presentation, I will be sending a survey to you that will ask some questions about, the presentation, but also for CEU credits. So if you need those, please reach out to me and we will get those taken care of. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you all to Dr. Michael Mackert, who is the director for the UT Center for Health Comm, and also has multiple other, titles under his name that I will let him introduce you to.
All right. Well, it's good to be here with y'all today. So and we aren't going to go through titles because no one needs that. What I wanted to do is kind of hit three, I think, big things. And one is just want to really quickly just kind of describe and define health communication the way our center defines it, because I think it's really important to kind of frame everything else I'll say afterwards. I was going to share a couple of tools that we use in developing more effective health comm campaigns, just kind of things that you can use in your work. There are things we very much use in our work. And then I'm going to show a couple examples of how we actually put that into practice in a case study. And so I'm going to share a case study it's a statewide campaign that we've been part of here in Texas to prevent substance use disorder. So I always start talks by defining health communication, mainly because when people hear health communication, when I'm speaking to a more clinical audience, they hear health communication and they hear patient-provider communication. People more in public health might think tips from former smokers, or this is your brain on drugs, or kind of the truth campaign. And it's true that kind of health comm can be all of those things. But the way our center defines health communication is both the science and the art of using communication to advance the health and well-being of people and populations. So it is very much, patient-provider interpersonal communication all the way up to big mass media campaigns. But the science piece is what's most important in that definition. People from some of these other fields occasionally will think of communication as a soft skill. And we're really dedicated to the idea of evidence-based health communication. There's decades of theory and research and evidence on what good health comm is. And we very much believe, we can train you in this. It's a skill. You can get better at it. And so everything we do is really framed in this idea of evidence-based health communication. I'll tell you really quickly about our center. We have kind of three big areas of work. And one is, based in university, we certainly have lots of faculty and students doing research on a lot of different issues at a lot of different levels of communication. We have some education programming. So we have a minor for students here on the UT Austin campus. We have our Health Communication Leadership Institute, which is developed for mid-career health communication professionals from around the country. So every summer we host a 3-day workshop, and it's folks from the CDC, state health departments, healthcare systems, kind of all the different kind of groups you can imagine having people with interest in health comm. And then third is practice. And that's mainly what I'm going to share with you today. Is on the practice side of our work, we do funded work with external partners, whether it be the state of Texas, MD Anderson, UT System, all kinds of different partners to develop, implement, and then evaluate public health campaigns. And so the case that I'm going to share today is one of those examples of some statewide work we've done in Texas. Okay, I want to start by sharing kind of just a couple ways that we think about developing more effective health messages, and then the case study will kind of show you how we put those into practice. The first thing is kind of just trying to think of this as a 4-step process. And so this is the way I teach my advertising students to think about good advertising campaign design. And these are the steps we go through in all of our projects. And I'll kind of start showing you as we go through the presentation today, how we put these into action. But we think of the first step as research. And so in health communication practice work, we think of research as, surveys and interviews and focus groups, but also lit reviews and how, environmental scans of how other people tried to solve this problem. At the end of all that research, there's a couple key insights that usually emerge. And so if we're going to build a really effective health communication campaign, it's very hard to do that on a giant pile of data. It's a lot easier to do if we can think about, what are 3, 4, 5 things where we really understand what matters to the audience we're trying to reach, where communication can make a difference. And those are insights that can really drive a campaign. We then think about both strategy and messaging, at a high level, what are we trying to say and who are we trying to say it to? And then finally is tactics. So what does it look like, on a bus, on a billboard, in social media, all those things. It's really easy to want to jump fast to tactics because it's kind of the fun and the creative part in a lot of ways. But if you don't do the early steps correctly, then the end result is tactics that are kind of all over the place. They're all saying different things. And so if you do the first steps kind of rigorously, you end up with tactics in a campaign that everything really works together to achieve the goals you've set out for yourselves. I'm going to give you kind of two examples. One is a tool, and the other is kind of like an approach in the way we think about things to build these messages. So my favorite example of the single most important thing is the old Verizon "Can You Hear Me Now" campaign. So if I'm challenging my advertising students to build a campaign for any kind of brand, I challenge them to think of, if you were going to say in a single sentence what this entire campaign is going to be, what would it say? And I had a chance to talk to the creative team that built the old Verizon "Can You Hear Me Now" campaign. And they said there was actually just a single word. And if I ask you, it was the engineer with the engineering glasses on, kind of wandering the country, just saying, "Can you hear me now?" over and over and over again. And it was actually just a single word that guided that campaign. If I ask people to think about what word it is, the answers people tend to come up with they start describing a good cell phone network. So it's speed, it's coverage, it's reliability. The actual word they used was relentless. And so if they shot a 30-second TV ad and they thought it didn't communicate relentless well enough, they would redo it. And so the end result of that is an entire campaign that just communicates that idea of we are working the hardest to make our network the best, the most reliable, the fastest, the best coverage, all those things. But it was a kind of an attitude of relentlessness in doing so, which was that campaign was meant to communicate. So we always think on all of our projects, what is that single most important thing that will really drive the entire campaign forward? The second thing, and this is more of a kind of a philosophy in doing really good health communication work, is you have to sort of, to the degree we can, test everything, double check our assumptions. And I'll give you 3 really quick examples. So one is that we have an app developed on how to get expectant dads more involved in prenatal health. And, my pregnancy today and a lot of things that are aimed at moms to be often, it's like your baby's as big as a grape and an apple and all the way up. And in thinking about how we can engage expectant fathers, we had the idea as a team of maybe we could do sports metaphors. So your baby's as big as a golf ball, a tennis ball, all the way up through probably a bowling ball because it's really heavy at the end. We tested this. And in a national sample of expectant new dads, it tested something like 65% said they preferred the food-based metaphors. And we asked why. They said it's because it helps reinforce the importance of proper nutrition during pregnancy. Definitely not what we would have expected. I think if we hadn't tested that idea, we probably would have done the sports thing, and we would have been wrong, and for a real sad reason, actually. And so the idea of testing, we might think we're right, but we'd still rather have confirmation with data whenever we can. And so it was really fortunate that in that case, we did test that visual kind of the approach to that particular metaphor idea, because we ended up with a much better data-informed approach as a result of kind of that big survey we had a chance to do. As a second example, and this is definitely related to substance use, we've done work in Texas with prescription opioid overdose prevention. And in one year, we were going to produce a video that was aimed at caregivers. So aimed at someone who might be concerned at, a loved one, a friend, a colleague, concerned about someone else's opioid misuse. We had a postdoc who was kind of specialized in more interpersonal communication. And what they told us was there's basically 2 patterns of kind of communication within families. One is really direct, where you're going to say, "Hey, I am very concerned about your prescription opioid misuse." And there's another that's really indirect, where someone's going to be like, "Well, I was watching House MD, and it sure seems like he misuses opioids. What do you think about that?" And kind of see if the other person's willing to engage on what might be a hard conversation. We weren't sure what would be the best version of that conversation to depict in one of these videos. So we tested it. And it turned out that showing the more indirect approach to communication ended up working the best. Because if you showed the direct version, people who prefer that indirect style of communication, their reaction was a little bit like, "Oh, I could never be that direct." If you show the indirect version, you have people who might prefer a direct style as being like, "I don't have to pretend that I watch a TV show, I'll just talk to the person." So that more indirect pattern shown as the example of the conversation made it more accessible to everybody. So we pursued that version. And as a third example, it was in June 2020, UT Austin asked our center to do some research and guide sort of good health comm heading into fall 2020 during COVID. And so we had a chance to do, we did, I think, 18 focus groups with faculty, staff, and students in about a 2-week stretch. And one of the things that we did early on was we had found this is the mascot. I think it might have been from Western Illinois University, actually. And we use this as an example of how a school might use its mascot. People at Texas, it was like, thought the bulldog was cute, thought it was like, it's like, oh, he's wearing his mask wrong. It should be up over his nose. Like, people kind of like this. I mean, June 2020, it was very intense. People were already very tired. And so there was a bit of like, this felt okay as a tone. And so we then went out and used Photoshop to put a face mask on Bevo, the UT mascot, and had 2 focus groups. And people hated this so very much. I mean, they really disliked it. And so my postdoc and I, we regrouped the other day. It was like, okay, we're done showing that to people. It's very clearly wrong. And we then passed along to the university level communication team because they use Bevo as a mascot in all kinds of things. I am positive at some point they probably would have tried to put a mask on Bevo, like this kind of a Photoshop version. I was like, whatever you people do, don't do this. Like, really good health comm is about sometimes finding what not to say. And in this case, we had a really important finding that, like, well, you might look at another school and think their kind of mascot themed mask idea is fun or different or seems okay. In this case, as soon as we put it on our local mascot, it went over very, very poorly. And so in all the work that we do, we're always trying to kind of do these A/B tests, like check different ideas, different approaches, and find out what works best, and then follow our data where it leads. So what I want to do now is spend the bulk of the time with you today sharing this about this campaign that we've done in Texas. We're a little bit over 2 years into this at this point, and it's a substance use prevention campaign. But the goal is to go very upstream, like very prevention. And it's a lot of how can we promote social connection, different kinds of healthier approaches to coping, and really try and prevent substance use in the first place. So that was one component of the work, is like just to communicate that message, broadly speaking. And then there was a second idea and component of this, which was meant to be this interactive tool where people who went to a website could sort of answer some questions either about themselves or about something they'd be concerned about, and get some really customized ideas, resources, tools. And so our role on this project was first to do all of the research for the entire campaign. And so we had about 5-6 months to do nothing but research to eventually guide this public health campaign, which, as I understand it, is the largest public health campaign in Texas history. And then once the state had decided who the media agency would be to like really run the statewide media campaign, our work was going to continue specifically around designing, promoting, and evaluating that interactive check-in tool. So it was hard. So when the state came to us and said, who should we care about? Texas is a really big state. Every single statewide campaign in Texas we do, part of the way they talk about it is like, well, this should reach all Texans. Well, all Texans means a whole lot of different things. And, you could see here that it was kind of bulleted out with some of the early priorities, and we kept pushing them on, like, we can't really aim for all Texans. Like, are there groups you care about the most? Are there people we most need to reach? One of the ways we really kind of internally started to talk about this and think about it was people who maybe historically have not trusted the healthcare system a whole lot for lots of reasons, people who might not trust the state for health information, and then COVID made both those things worse. And that was like a shorter heuristic we kept using to think about some of the groups we most wanted to reach. And so you can see here, we had some work specifically thinking about different kind of community leaders. And so some of our early research and thinking was really around healthcare leaders, school board members, and faith leaders, like 3 groups who we think have a lot of authority within their more local communities. And if we did a good job getting tools and resources to them, they might become advocates in the communities they have credibility with. And you can see here some of the different ways we thought about priority markets. Also, if you have a big, realistically speaking, if you have a big media budget for a project like this, the big media markets in Texas are Dallas, Houston, Austin, and San Antonio. Those are not automatically the counties that are some of these priority markets in terms of where the health issues were, but thinking about where can we spend media money that can actually then also help reach the whole state. Those are some of the priorities we had to kind of balance. So in terms of the project timeline, I mentioned that, it started and we were really focused specifically on research, and I'll tell you more about that research looked like. But that was in the first year of our work. It was really built around kind of what can we learn that can guide this overall project. The Turn 2 campaign itself, which we did in partnership with Fleischman Hillard, that was going to launch in year 2, and we were going to evaluate how the broad media launch was going. And at the same time, we were going to be continuing to work on building out and kind of getting this sort of interactive check-in tool ready to go and launched. And so by the end of year 3, the goal is have everything evaluated. This work is all currently funded by ARPA, kind of COVID relief funds. And so, we have some projects that have continued for years and years. All of the thinking on this particular project was really around a much more defined likely end date for the project. And so it really shaped the way we thought about the campaign itself, the resources. Like, we didn't want to provide resources that might need to be updated, because at a certain point, the funding for the project might end and kind of the resources have to live in a more evergreen state. So that was pretty important to us, thinking about the way we wanted to approach all this work throughout. In terms of the check-in itself, I mentioned that we wanted to think of checking people who might want to check in about themselves, but also might want to check in for something else, for someone they're concerned about, and really think about kind of offering personalized resources. And it had to be available in both English and Spanish. And the way Texas translates materials tends to be like a strict literal translation, and it was a constant challenge throughout all this work to think about what is the proper Spanish translation of some of these things. Like, we didn't, when we were thinking of like, is this tool, is it a quiz? That didn't feel quite right. We settled on check-in for the English language version of the tool, but then there isn't a perfect equivalent in Spanish, we learned, as we were kind of trying to figure out like, what would we call this in Spanish? How's that all going to work? And the modules in the check-in tool are kind of 4 big areas. And it's like kind of just basic demographics that we care about, issues related to mental health, social connection, and then finally substance use. So depending on how people answer in the interactive tool itself, and at the end of the presentation, I'm gonna have like a QR code and a link you can go to actually try it out for yourself if you want to. We ask questions about substance use. We have questions about kind of what people's emotional states might be. What are other things that are stressing them out? Whether it be housing insecurity, current events. Like, this was a COVID-19 kind of recovery funded project. So at the core of it was very much sort of COVID and knock-on effects after COVID. And then we also had some conversation guides. We've had really good luck with this across a number of different projects, where if you are concerned about someone else and you don't know how to start having that conversation, like, we want to give you a conversation guide of how you might do that. Or if you want to go ask for someone for help and you're not comfortable usually asking people for help, giving people tools and resources and language that they can copy, learn, make their own, and encouraging people to reconnect with someone they haven't talked to in a while too. I mentioned we did research. We sure did do a lot. One of the things that I thought was really fortunate in this particular project is there's a lot of really good evidence already published in kind of existing academic literature about a lot of things. You can see on the left here, up in the top left corner, risk factors for SUD and mental health, like social connectedness, demographic, geographic variation, healthy coping strategies, family communication. And so we had a bunch of grad students on this particular project. And so what we did is we asked teams of grad students to go out, summarize existing literature that already exists, and then convert that into 1-2-page summaries that would be understandable to our program staff members and our designers and our copywriters. So they could translate, tons and tons and tons of academic journal articles into what does this mean in the real world. And that was an important kind of early step that we could use, both so we wouldn't be writing interview guides and doing surveys sort of to refine in our own data what already exists. So it helped us identify what do we already know really well that we can skip asking new questions about, and then what can we immediately start taking action on while we pursue our own original data collection. We also did a lot of work on an environmental scan. The environmental scan, I think the part that was kind of most interesting to us was looking at lots of other kind of interactive tools like that. People are really familiar with kind of online forums that are meant to give them a customized solution. Like, what kind of mattress do you like? There's lots of things that are not in the health context. And we did a lot of homework kind of on that idea of a tool generally to find the things that we like, to find the things that we wanted to copy where we could. So we kind of match people's expectations of how a tool like that might work. On the top right there, you can see we did a number of interviews and then focus groups with community leaders. And it really helped us understand from people who are working in public health, again, faith leaders, school board members, thinking about how the communities they have connections to trust or don't trust state for health information. I remember we were talking to one person who ran a big health clinic, and with a population that you might assume wasn't going to be the most trustworthy of the state for health information. And I asked a question about that, and the participant was like, "Well, of course they trust state for health information as soon as our clinic tells them they should." And it was a really kind of nice way of crystallizing for us that important role of local physicians, the person you have the connection with as a healthcare provider, to take information from the state that people might be skeptical of, but once it has that seal of approval from the person they know, like then it becomes a trusted resource. That was really helpful for us. We also used the conversations with community leaders, both in the original interviews and some follow-up focus groups, just to get a sense of like how they might imagine different kind of communities they work with. What would people like in terms of like how almost emotional and gritty should this campaign be? Like it was this constant challenge for us over the course of the entire project, both to live up to the state of Texas HHSC brand style guide, where like the brand is like a hero brand, a public health brand, but then people in the community saying, well, people who struggle with substance use, like it's hard, people can look kind of rough sometimes, and really trying to match what they thought the campaign kind of should look like with what the campaign would have to look like to sort of accommodate and line up with some of those brand style guides that were a really real, really very real practical concern for us. We had a chance to do a number of surveys. We had one statewide survey that was exclusively about this project. And that was, we were asking things like, what matters the most to people? How, do they hold stigmatizing beliefs towards people with substance use disorder? And then our center also runs a survey once a quarter on issues related to health communication in the state of Texas more broadly. And so twice in the early phase of this project, we had a chance to sort of sneak in blocks of items specifically to inform this work. And then on the right here, you can see we did some more creative testing, really try to understand. One of the tests we did, like I've mentioned, the campaign was called Turn To, and Turn To could mean turn to someone else for help. It could mean turn to someone you're concerned about. It could mean turn to healthier coping strategies. Like Turn To could mean lots of things. The other idea that originally was strong was this idea of on my mind. And we had a lot of ideas of like what could be on people's mind for like things that are stressing them out, things that are causing those concerns. On my mind could mean ways that you're interested in kind of getting more help. In our testing, the Turn To definitely went better. It was the stronger alternative, and through some of this creative testing is how we got there. So I mentioned earlier that we had a single most important thing is really important. Here you can see the single most important thing for this campaign was that many Texans turn to substance use to cope with the isolation and stress resulting from COVID-19, but we're here to guide them toward reconnection and healthier ways to manage difficult situations and emotions. It's a little bit longer than the Verizon Relentless example, but it's a really concise way of saying like that is what this campaign is going to achieve. And on the right, you can see we outlined, what are some of the big calls to action? Like reaching out to someone to connect with, visiting the campaign website. Like every single message that we put out, we really wanted to have people taking some specific action afterwards. So we're not just trying to raise awareness that like this is a thing. We really want people to take a next step towards something that could be helpful to them or someone they care about. You can see here we put in here like a number of I mentioned in earlier on that one of the tricks of building a really good health communication campaign is what are the insights and all the data you're collecting that can really guide an effective health communication campaign. And so here you can say I bulleted out a handful of them here. Why might someone not go looking for help? And it was really interesting. There was a really strong vein in both interviews and survey data that people don't want to be seen as weak or irresponsible or not good enough. Texans really value self-reliance. And so that was a really key thing that kind of kept appearing in all kinds of different ways. One of the other tricks was, or hard things we had to think about was, for some people, alcohol or drugs might be part of socializing or might be part of how they do relax and escape. And so if we are going to encourage people to turn to someone else, like trying to recognize that some of that connection might be happening in places where alcohols might be consumed, like that was just kind of they were really connected in lots of ways that we had to think through. And then you can see on the right here, we had, we were started thinking about kind of what's really going to motivate these audiences. What are some of the challenges? If you're in certain parts of Texas, there might not be great resources for some of these things. And so that's another reason that we were very interested in developing some of the recommendations of what people could do. We really wanted to try to give people, we thought of it as like, what could they do right now? What could they do with maybe a week or two to prepare, find some resources? And what are much longer term strategies for healthier coping strategies? This is a test we did. It was one of my favorite things we did in this project. The state of Texas has a kind of prescribed style guide for all its public health campaigns. Every state's going to have this. But something that we weren't really sure about is like there were a number of things that we were hearing and thinking about in our research that were not like we could have some flexibility within that style guide. So here you can see one of the conversations we were having was basically how Texas-y should this campaign be? And we weren't sure how much people would want to see this be like super Texas-y. So on the top left there, you can see that's like the very, very Texas-y version of the campaign. And so it was this mood board that our designer created. It's like people in cowboy hats and the state of Texas flag and blue bonnets. And it was like over the top Texas. At the bottom right, you can see a campaign that's kind of just not Texas-y at all. It could be almost anything. And then in the middle, you can see one that we called medium Texas, where some of the hints of Texas are a little bit subtler. It could be the skyline in the background. And when we tested this kind of medium Texas-y one, these are not fully formed ads, but it was enough to help us get this clear feel of like, when we did start building real ads, how much should they be like screaming Texas versus just whispering Texas versus like not Texas at all? And the answer was kind of that mid-level Texas. We did a campaign evaluation survey in year 2. And this survey was collected not very long after the campaign launched. So we were not 100% sure, given how fast this campaign had to happen for like fiscal reasons, where it fit in the project timeline, what it would be. But almost a fifth of people in our 2,000 person sample reported kind of seeing or hearing the ads. And then 62% reported taking some kind of relevant action as a result of the campaign. That could be talking to someone. It could be going to a campaign website. Like there were a lot of cues to action and things we were encouraging people to do. It's also the case that you can see that those living in urban areas were more likely to have seen and heard the campaign than those living in rural areas. So we had a question in the survey that was like, do you live in an urban area, suburban area, or rural? And again, this is a function of the way the media markets in Texas work, which is you can buy lots of ads in the main metro areas, but those ads on broadcast media and symbols are not going to be reaching people kind of in more rural areas. So finding the right ways to reach the rural audiences is just kind of an ongoing challenge. And we did some interviews about the campaign too, and people really got that this campaign was about mental health, but then it was a pretty consistent question or confusion that they weren't sure exactly what was being advertised necessarily. And so as we head into year 3, we're really doing a lot of evaluation of those resource guides that we created. So if you check the right series of boxes and housing insecurity is a big concern for you, the interactive tool will give you information about housing insecurity and some resources you might have. And so we're really right now evaluating kind of how good is that check-in tool? How good are the resources? How can they be improved? Also continuing to kind of check the recall of the overall campaign. And at the end of the project, we're going to do one big final evaluation of the campaign and how it's going. I have a couple last things here, and then I'll be able to open up for whatever kind of questions y'all might have. As of October 2023, you can see that we've had almost 20,000 people complete that, like, you're concerned about yourself interactive check-in tool, and about 1,300 have finished it for someone else. So there's a huge kind of focus in people really doing it for themselves, and then a much smaller number, but like 70% completion rate. It's about 6, 7, 8 minutes. Like, it takes a little bit to get through this thing. Is a pretty remarkable completion rate that we're really proud of, and excited that this many Texans have taken like this specific tool that was created to get people connected to personalized resources. You can see here, like, as we've spent down money, you can see like this is a very large budget just for the media buy. And you can see here like the kinds of media we're using. And so there's digital display ads, there's traditional out of home, that might be billboards, social media, digital video, email, print, search engine, kind of all sorts of things. And you can see both impressions and clicks. If you're interested in taking a look at the tool, This is the QR code that can take you directly to the interactive check-in tool. And then, I try to use the substance use because of like the topic and what kind of this group is focused on as a way of framing the conversation. But, we do this work across a lot of different health issues, from hand hygiene to tobacco cessation to HPV vaccination promotion. It's the same set of approaches and tools, no matter what the health issue is. And so, the thing that I always try to focus on is like really good health comm functions the same way, regardless of the health issue of the population. It's a series of steps you can follow to get to really good messages. The last thing I'll share with you before I open up for Q&A is our center produced a course here in partnership with the Texas Epidemic Public Health Institute. This particular course is part of an online ed program that we've developed that is aimed at sort of public health professionals and clinicians with 1 hour targeted training on specific health issues. This particular course is free, and it focuses on pandemic preparedness communication. I am sharing this course in a lot of my presentations, mainly because, there's a lot of public health people in this room, or you might know people who are interested in a course on pandemic health communication, but also anyone who completes this course. Part of completing the course is the chance to get a code to take another of our courses for free. And so we have a course on the role of good visuals in health communication, or the role of emotion in health communication. We just released a new course that's more clinical focused, which is kind of good health comm for the deaf and hard of hearing community. So I'm sharing this link mainly because I think this is a really good resource about pandemic health comm, but for people who are interested in learning more about kind of good health communication more broadly, the code you get at the end can link to some other courses that might also be of interest. Okay. I also had shared, I'm happy to kind of share my slides afterwards in terms of contact information and QR codes and everything else. But again, just really appreciate the chance to be with y'all. It's fun and exciting for us to start sharing the work we've done on this Turn 2 campaign, and I'd be happy to answer any and all questions about this or health communication a little bit more broadly. So appreciate the time today.
Well, thank you so much for, sharing. That was awesome to learn about how you guys, disseminated those campaigns and went through with that. I was going to say, do you guys have a list of those resources that you found that went into the factors, as to why people didn't get help, or maybe why they chose, to do certain things?
Yeah, so the quick answer is no.
Okay.
We developed those lit reviews. They were purely for internal, like those were for internal use as we were like getting these giant lit reviews. There's no reason we couldn't make them available. No one's ever asked that question before. So they do exist as like 2-page PDFs that don't look all that great. But I'll make a little note because that's interesting. Like, like this is seriously only the second time we've talked about this project in public. Right. And so the fact that on round 2, someone's immediately like, can we see your lit reviews? Is interesting. Like we have had, we're starting the academic publishing process on this project. So the way our center works is like the state of Texas pays us to build the campaign. And then after, so the goal is always that. But then they're also very supportive of us actually like publishing academically on the research we did to get there. Right. And so we have a first article that has already been accepted. It's kind of a theory of reasoned action approach to some of the that was based on the very first survey that we did. We have another one that's kind of in process that would be more on like the conversation guides. And so, but I'm going to make a note about those lit review cheat sheets because I can really imagine them being useful to other people. Right. And that by itself isn't some kind of an article. It's just like a little review we could put out. So
I was just thinking, because one, we're going to be doing like a statewide survey for Illinois that IHEC's going to do, but also, as we build up some of our campaigns and how we want to move forward with that, if we wanted to do our own campaign or something, just to have a resource, to pass out of like, this is what we've done and this is how we move forward.
It was like, we usually don't have like the human capacity to do it at quite this scale, just the way like the budget and the project worked. We just had more grad students than normal. And so those first weeks, it was like, what's the first thing we can have them working on while we're planning our own surveys, while we're getting IRB approval for interviews. So part of it is just like the logistics. We don't always have that, but this case we did. And it was really, really helpful. And on that project, we have faculty in communication, but there was like a couple social work faculty, like the faculty experts on the project come from all over. And so we were like, hey, what should we, like we were able to go to other faculty experts and be like, what should we do a lit review on? And like the whole faculty team was able to kind of give us ideas that then these students could go pursue.
Okay. I was gonna say, if anybody else has any questions, you're welcome to unmute. I'm still thinking, so. I'm not seeing anything else, but I did want to ask as well. So with these materials and the PDF, is there like a website that we can see like the work that you guys have done or any of like the healthcom campaigns that we can see, like graphics?
Yeah, so the main Turn to campaign is if you just like Google like Turn to Texas, I
Mhm.
mean that's the landing page for all of
Okay.
the Texas specific stuff. If you go to our website, which is I have a link in my profile there, or was on that last slide. We have a page on our current website, which we're actually redoing right now, but it's kind of like our work. And
Okay.
so in some cases, we have like 2-page case studies of like other examples of like when we've done this kind of work on other topics.
Gotcha.
Here's the 2-page version of what it looked like. And I think we have one on our, we did a project about alcohol and sexual consent. I know that one's on there. We've done similar things for some other projects, just as other ways of sort of sharing the behind the scenes process or the way we go about it when we
Right.
don't have 45 minutes in a webinar, but someone might kind of want to go steal a case study.
Right. Okay. Awesome. Yeah, I wanted to ask if any of the other participants have any questions. I know two of them are GAs, so that's fine. They're with me. Um, and if not, I mean, I always tell people, if they have questions, they can email me and I can be the mediator for that. Because my plan is to use this webinar as a talking point for how we're going to develop IHEC surveys and our campaigns moving forward. So,
Yeah, the other thing that if you can reach out to me afterwards if you're interested in is so when we had the Texas survey I mentioned,
mhm.
I wanted to do that because during COVID, like I don't know if you're familiar, but the National Cancer Institute has a survey called Health Information National Trends Survey.
Hmm.
And it's like this rolling survey about health information. It's a lot of cancer prevention because of
Yeah,
NCI.
right.
And when COVID hit, I was like, boy, I really wish I had a Texas survey that I could tap into to do some message testing, to do things relevant.
Right.
And then it was like 6, 9 months after, well, not after COVID, but after like that first like really rough year, we had some funding pop up where we had a chance to like just start soft launching it.
Hmm.
So we've now run 3 or 4 versions of that. And some items have been specifically about substance use, opioid use, other topics that might be of interest. So if you want to follow up with me afterwards, I could share with you, a Google Doc version. The first article coming out of that is going to be published in the Texas Public Health Journal pretty
Okay.
soon. But for people who are just in like state level, like rolling data collection, we definitely learned a few lessons. Like the first survey,
Right.
definitely made a few mistakes that we fixed for round 2, but happy to share anything on that front that might be helpful to y'all.
All right. Awesome. Well, if anybody else has any questions, I will let you go. But thank you so much for your time today, and we'll stay in touch.
Yeah, no, this is a lot of fun. I appreciate the chance to share with y'all.